So there's something I've been noticing coming from the right, which previously had come from the left, and that is believe the government narrative or you're a conspiracy theorist. Now, we saw this during COVID coming from the left. If you said the virus came from anything other than a bat in the Wuhan wet market, you were a conspiracy theorist. You deserve to be censored, ripped off the internet. You were a problem. You needed to believe the government narrative or else. And many of us said, wait, look, where's the bat? Where's the soup? Where's the lady that apparently ate this soup of the bat at the wet market? And what about this Institute of Virology that happens to be right next to this wet market where they actually study viruses and potentially there could have been an escape from a lab, right? Many of us pointed out what would be reasonable questions, reasonable suspicions. Was there any evidence that the virus came from a lab specifically? I mean, there were some people who speculated saying it looks like the virus itself. When you actually study it, it doesn't look like it's natural. I mean, there was a lot of different speculation, but fundamentally, there was never any hard proof of either theory that the virus came from a wet market or that the virus came from a lab. Now, you might sit on different sides of that issue today. You might say, well, actually, there's a lot of evidence, mounting evidence that points towards the lab. Certainly, many of us think that way. And others say, no, it absolutely points to mounting evidence pointing to it being natural and evolving naturally. Whatever side you're on, for the longest time, they told us that we weren't allowed to question the lab leak, that was not allowed. It was conspiratorial. Now, here we are, fast forward, and we're allowed to actually talk about it. Same thing with the Hunter Biden laptop. If you said Hunter Biden's laptop was anything other than a Russia plant, you were censored, right? I mean, this was just how dare you? Hunter Biden would never do anything like this. And then, of course, it came out that it was real. The laptop really did belong to him. But for the longest time, people were censored if they said it was anything other than some sort of Russian ploy to get at Biden. Fast forward to today, and the assassination of Charlie Kirk is one of these hot button issues where I'm seeing increasingly from people on the right that same sort of narrative that was pushed by people on the left, which is if you question it, you are a conspiracy theorist. Essentially, you're full of shit. Let me just share with you this tweet. This is from Daryl Cooper, goes by Martyr Made, and he says, "This Israel killed Charlie Kirk narrative is so dumb. So his views on Israel were changing, and prominent Zionists were pressuring him to get back on the reservation. So what? You have no actual evidence that Israel was involved. Much being of what's being passed around as evidence, the old man being at 9/11 and the Boston bombing, etc., is pure bullshit. Corners of the right are starting to remind me of nothing so much as talking to Arabs when I used to work in the Middle East. Every conspiracy theory is true, and they all lead back to Israel. They can't even think straight about political questions because of it. Conspiracy thinking is what they do instead of politics. A lot of people who like to point out how improbable it is that the people accusing Jews of poisoning wells, eating Christian babies would all be making it up, then turn around and confidently say the Israelis killed Charlie with no evidence whatsoever. Even if you consider Jews or Zionists your enemies, it doesn't give you the right to abandon justice and reason." Daryl Cooper does a podcast with Scott Horton. I actually was with Scott Horton last night at an event, and him and I got into a friendly, because Scott is a friend, we got into a friendly disagreement about this, where Scott also said, this whole notion that anybody other than basically the government sanctioned narrative is just bullshit. That obviously Tyler Robinson killed the guy, and that's just the end of the story. And my question on this is, why are we so quick to believe the government narrative, especially when the government narrative, just like with the Wuhan bat, the bat in the Wuhan wet market, when there's so many plot holes and things are not adding up? I believe it is our obligation when things are not adding up to question the government narrative. In fact, I think it's our obligation at this point in this society, and just being a free society and a democracy, to always question the government narrative. In fact, start there. Start with questioning the government narrative and make sure by holding the government accountable that their narrative actually lines up. And the fact of the matter is, when it comes to Tyler Robinson and him being the shooter of Charlie Kirk, sure, is it possible that he's the killer of Charlie Kirk? Sure, yes. But the information that the government has given us so far doesn't really line up. There's a lot of plot holes. There's a lot of missing information. There's a lot of things that just simply don't make sense. And they're telling us, well, you just have to believe this. And then these other people are telling us, and if you don't believe this, then you're a big conspiracy theorist, and you've got Israel brain rot, and you just think all roads lead to Israel. And without even actually investigating why people are pointing at Israel in the first place. Is it just really purely made up out of nowhere? One person online even said to me, what if I said Kim Iverson was the one who killed Charlie Kirk? What would you say about that, huh? Should we all just believe that? Well, I have an alibi. I wasn't anywhere near where he was at the time of the shooting. I wasn't there. There's no possible way. I have an alibi. So obviously I wasn't the one who did this. And that's actually the majority of people in America. You can't just point at a random person or a random theory and then and equate that to why people are suspicious of Israel in this particular case. You've got two people who have told various different sources that they were aware of Charlie Kirk himself being afraid of Israel. So at least two different sources confirming, who were close to Charlie Kirk, that he was afraid of Israel. Then you have many other sources like Candace Tucker, Max Blumenthal, saying that Charlie Kirk was feeling pressured by Israel, that Charlie Kirk did not like Benjamin Netanyahu, that Charlie Kirk felt like he was being treated like an enemy. He said that publicly on Megyn Kelly's show. So there's more evidence. Now, Charlie Kirk has never once uttered my name. So obviously, I would not be somebody that anybody would think actually pulled this off. I mean, this trying to equate it to total and complete nonsense, trying to take a theory that actually has even just a little bit of basis, just like with the Wuhan, the Wuhan virus, the theory that it came from a lab was started with simply because there happened to be a lab right there in Wuhan that was testing viruses. So it's worth looking into. There was no real evidence right away that it came from the lab, but there was a lot of inconsistencies in the official story when the virus actually hit, why the government was acting in a certain way. The military games that happened in Wuhan in October prior to the official supposed leak of the virus, or the discovery of the virus, if you believe that it came from a woman eating bat soup in the wet market, whichever theory you want to go with. There was enough suspicion to question the official narrative. And in this particular case, there is enough suspicion to question the official narrative. Things are not adding up to most average people who just would like things to add up. And if they did add up, I think there's not enough, as much as people want to just say there's Israel brain rot going on, I don't think there's actually enough Israel brain rot in the vast majority of Americans to have them all just suddenly focus on Israel did it, because they're just some sort of mindless, bots that just are anti-Semitic at the core. I mean, that's where this kind of, hey, you're a conspiracy theorist and how dare you even question anything outside of the government narrative. That is what that is essentially asserting of all of us people who are saying, look, the official narrative doesn't add up. Charlie, I don't know of any other group that Charlie said he was feeling treated like an enemy, that he was feeling that he had disclosed to a couple of sources he was afraid of them, that he was recently speaking out against, recently having interventions in the Hamptons, all of that leading up in the weeks before his death. There is no other suspect except for Israel. Now, maybe there are, and maybe we just haven't seen any evidence of that. Maybe people aren't talking about that. And that is something worth exploring. And we should explore it. It is our obligation to explore every single possible avenue, every single possible theory until one makes sense. And the reality is that if who assassinated Charlie Kirk was a very organized, real professional assassin organization, whether it be state sponsored or just high level professional assassins, if it was done by a state or professional assassin group, we're probably never going to find out. We're never going to actually get to the bottom of it. And they're just going to pin it on the kid. And that is just going to be the end of the story. But look, things are just not adding up. Let me give you an example. This is Kash Patel being questioned about the gun. Now, one of the biggest things that's not adding up is we still haven't seen any imagery of Tyler Robinson with the gun. They're saying that there's been different theories of how he got the gun to the roof and how he got the gun off of the roof, but we've actually never seen any real images of him with the gun. There's him jumping, what looks like him jumping off the roof, allegedly him jumping off the roof. Maybe it was him. And it does look like he's holding something, but it looks floppy. It looks like it's just the towel and not actually the gun itself, which would be a rigid, large object. But this is what Kash Patel had to say when he was questioned by Newsmax, when they said, look, we don't see the gun. How did he get the gun off the roof? This is what Kash Patel had to say.
Did anyone in the crowd or anywhere else assist in the assassination of Charlie Kirk? In other words, is there any evidence to suggest that the shooter might have had help?
As I've said from the beginning, this is an extensive and exhaustive investigation, and I can only speak from the FBI's perspective that is still ongoing. We are still triaging voluminous amounts of data. We're still interrogating numerous witnesses, and we're going into devices such as cell phones and laptops and extracting data. And so that's the expertise of the FBI that we're bringing and working with our state and local partners. And as we get information that is of value, we turn it over immediately to the prosecutorial authorities for them to make their decision.
Okay, why hasn't Lance Twiggs, the boyfriend, been arrested? Don't the text messages prove that he knew that Tyler Robinson assassinated Charlie Kirk and then he did not turn him in? Why hasn't he been arrested?
Again, the charging decisions will be made by the prosecuting authorities in the state of Utah. And so we will leave those decisions to them. We are working 24/7 to provide all the evidence we can to them in a timely fashion. That's why we were on the scene almost immediately, and that's why we've been flying back and forth, not just personnel, but also DNA matters, and also these devices that you speak to. Thankfully, the FBI has regional centers scattered across the country, and we're able to exploit these devices, and that's why you have the text messages. And the text messages speak for themselves, but we're still going. We have more work to do.
Okay, and I know, Mr. Director, that you knew Charlie well, so this hits personally as well, happening just 8 days ago. Let's talk about the text messages. Does the FBI believe that they could have been, you know, like a pre-planned setup to hide any involvement that Lance might have had in planning this assassination?
You know, now that the state case has been brought and the charges have been alleged, you know, I have to withhold any sort of stylization of the evidence. And because there's more evidence coming in literally every single day as we interrogate witnesses who knew these individuals and who knew the suspect and the family members as well, we're getting more and more information. And those are critical pieces of information that we have to hold in the evidentiary chain of command so that prosecutors can use it at trial. The worst thing that we can have happen is if we mishandle evidence and then they cannot use it at trial. That would be an injustice to Charlie Kirk.
All right, we're showing video of the moment that Tyler Robinson jumped off that roof about 15 feet. Mm-hmm. He drops down to the grass below, Mr. Director. We do not see anything that looks like a gun in his pants. We don't see it. Where is the gun, according to the FBI, in this video? And I understand that this is just surveillance from quite a distance and it's grainy, but we don't see anything there.
Yeah. Well, as we know, and look, I walked the steps myself when I got to the crime scene at the university there in Moorham, Utah. And what happened was the shooter, as you saw, jumped off the rooftop, and then we retraced his steps to where he discarded the firearm in a wooded area next to the campus. And I walked that ravine, and he discarded the firearm in its entirety with the towel wrapped around it. And one of the critical pieces of information we were able to pull was DNA off the towel and also DNA off a screwdriver that was found on the rooftop where the shooter was positioned in a prone position to take the shot that he took to kill Charlie Kirk. And so we were able to quickly analyze that DNA and come back with a positive match for the suspect. That's the type of evidentiary value that the FBI brings and critical analysis that we bring. And the rest, in terms of putting the entirety of it together, we're still looking at a lot of video, piecing it together. There was 1,000 hours, maybe 800 hours of video that we're trying to look at in totality from all the different camera angles. So it's very hard to do. We're working with the university as fast as we can, but they have one system in place, and we're working with them, and they've been great partners.
Okay, let me ask you about that, and I want to get to the roof. I asked the mayor of Orem why the roof...
Okay, so essentially, he didn't have an answer to, we don't see a gun. Where is the gun? And Kash Patel basically deflected and said, oh, he went into the woods. So he doesn't answer the question of where is the gun. And instead he says, we found DNA on a towel and we found DNA on a screwdriver. Does not mention them finding DNA on the actual gun that they had recovered in the woods, just claiming it was on a towel. Now, many people say that when they saw Tyler Robinson jumping off the roof, it does look like he's holding a long object, but it's floppy, it's flimsy. It could have been the towel that Kash Patel is talking about. And then they're saying that that towel was then they found his DNA on it and a screwdriver on the roof. So if he disassembled some of the, because we don't really see him with the gun jumping off the roof, if he disassembled it and put it into his backpack, for one, would he have been able to even do that? If he did do that and the screwdriver was on the roof, which is what they're kind of implying, then how the hell did he put the rifle back together without the screwdriver? He left the screwdriver on the roof. So how did he put it back together in the woods in order to hide it at the supposed drop point? Here's a video of a guy showing just how large this gun is and how there would be really no way for, I mean, we would have seen it. We would have seen it when he jumped off the roof with it. Watch this.
Oh, this giant thing that's wrapped in a towel, it's a pool cue, a guitar science project. It's a psychological operation to see if people really believe what the FBI say, but it's definitely not a rifle. Do they really think that we're that fucking stupid? There's gonna be no videos of this guy walking around with this in a towel, or in a backpack that doesn't fit, or down his fucking pant leg. This is my shortest rifle, okay? We're not fucking stupid.
So there we are. I mean, look, we're not that stupid to believe that, I mean, we don't have any images of this kid with the rifle. And we don't, and even then they have the rifle fully assembled out in the woods, and then they're saying he disassembled it. That has been debunked by people saying it's really not possible for him. If he did disassemble it, he would have needed to hide it in at least a 32-inch backpack. That is not what he was wearing. That would be the smallest piece that you could actually break the rifle down to, would be 32 inches. He was not wearing a large, that would be like a hiker's backpack for like long hiking ventures. He was just wearing a normal backpack. So a lot of this stuff is just not adding up. And so as long as it's not adding up and we get these weird text messages, Kash Patel's asked about that. Like, why isn't Lance Twiggs then being arrested if he knew about the crime? There's other theories about that. I don't think that you have an obligation to actually report a crime, even if you know that a crime existed or happened. I don't think that there's actually any legal obligation for you to have to report the crime. So there's a reason why maybe Lance wasn't arrested for that. But also, there's thinking that the text messages are fabricated and even recreated. Some have thought that perhaps because we're not seeing the actual text messages with the timestamps, and they're saying that they were sort of reproduced, whatever that means. The New York Times says that the text messages themselves were reproduced. Now that could mean that they were just typed on, reproduced by being typed onto a different, instead of just taking the screenshots of the text messages and showing us that, instead actually typing it out to give us kind of this transcript. I mean, that could have been what's called reproduced, or could have been reproduced by Lance maybe did delete the text messages, or maybe the text messages never existed. And in their aggressive interrogation of the boyfriend, perhaps they intimidated him to recreate some text between him and Tyler. And of course, the text messages just so happen to completely exonerate Lance Twiggs. And then there's just a lot of stuff that isn't adding up. There's also the question of the exit wound. If Charlie Kirk was killed with a 30-06 rifle, that is a very powerful rifle. If it was one round, it would have, which it was, he was shot once. If that was an entrance wound from the front, then the exit wound of a rifle that powerful would have absolutely resulted in the back of his neck or head, depending on the trajectory of the bullet, being blown out. And we would see back spray on that backdrop. We would see blood from the back. That would have been a large exit wound. And a lot of gun enthusiasts, a lot of people who are very experienced say the exit wound would have been catastrophic and there would have been evidence of that. But there wasn't any evidence of that sort of exit wound. So perhaps the bullet, and we have videos of another bullet looking like it's flying in from the right. And people saying that would have been a smaller caliber weapon, and that actually the hole that we saw in Charlie Kirk's neck would have been the actual exit wound, because we saw blood coming out of the wound rather than going inward, which is what you would normally see if a bullet was hitting a person and striking them. However, there is an artery there, and if you do hit an artery, you can get some blood splatter coming out. So there's ways to argue this in many different directions. But the bottom line is there's just a lot of inconsistencies. There's a lot of inconsistencies on this, and people are pointing that out. And unless the government can fill all the holes and ensure that we're getting a straightforward story that just seems like it makes sense, then I think it is our obligation, especially those of us who investigate these types of things, who research these types of things. It's our obligation to say, okay, but what about these other potential perpetrators? What about looking at other leads? What about looking in other directions? We now know that Tyler has not confessed to this crime. He is not cooperating with police. So it's not like, well, we got the guy, he confessed. And even then, yeah, the old guy, George Zinn, saying he was the shooter. And it turns out he wasn't the shooter, and people can absolutely verify he wasn't, yet he claimed that he was. So even if the person was claiming they were, why are they claiming that? What is their motive for claiming that? So look, it is our obligation, I think, to investigate every single lead. And what we have evidence of, okay, this isn't just some pie in the sky made up out of nowhere. We have evidence that Charlie Kirk was shifting his viewpoints on Israel, that he was getting a lot of pressure from Israel, that he received the call from Netanyahu himself to take a trip to Israel. We all know what that means. It's we need to get you back on track. And Charlie Kirk declined that. We have multiple sources who have said Charlie Kirk was feeling even threatened and he felt afraid. Now, what does this mean? Could it have been a state-sanctioned assassination by the state of Israel by Mossad? Sure. That's a lead that needs to be investigated. Now, of course, our government is not going to investigate that. So we can all just drop it. It's never going to happen, right? I think that's pretty clear. We're not even getting an Epstein Files investigation, let alone an investigation into the assassination of an American. We're not getting proper JFK assassination records either. We're not getting that stuff. So we can pretty much drop it. If it's Mossad, if it was Israel, we're never going to know. We're not getting information about them when it comes to USS Liberty, about 9/11, about JFK, about Epstein Files. We're not getting any of it. So why would we get any of the information now? However, it also could have been not Israel, but a pro-Israel organization. And I mean professional assassins, or even one professional assassin who's very good. It could have been a pro-Israel fanatic. And maybe it was, somebody that put a hit on him, a fanatic that put a hit on him. Or maybe it was just a fanatic himself that decided to go in and do something like this. That's tied to Israel. That's tied to the same motivation. We see this all the time with Israel. They use people that are outside of the government in order to implement the things that they want done. We see this all the time in the West Bank with the settlers. Yeah, they've got all of these crazy settlers that are going and doing basically the job that the government doesn't want to do, can't do. It looks bad. So they just send out these average people with weapons and have them go do it for them. It also could, look, if it was, I mean, this is the point, is to look at every single lead. If it was a pro-Israel assassin, whether it be an organization or an individual, wouldn't Netanyahu try to cover up for that person? Yes, Netanyahu would. Why? Well, for a variety of reasons. Maybe for one, he liked the job and he was happy about that, but also maybe he's afraid because hello, if there's an assassin out there that's able to kill you that easily and is able to pull something like that off, wouldn't you yourself also feel fear? I mean, wouldn't you yourself feel like, this is the theory with Zelensky. People keep talking about, well, Volodymyr Zelensky, he's just doing what the Azov battalion basically scares him into doing. He's afraid of the extremist factions in Ukraine, and he knows that if he goes to a peace deal, that they're going to murder him and his family, his wife and his children, and he doesn't want that. So there's a lot of motivations for why a person would cover up. One thing that Nick Fuentes brought up was, if Israel killed Charlie Kirk, then Trump and Vance must be complicit in this because they're essentially covering it up. And he says, so how do you explain that? Are you actually going to be claiming that Trump and JD Vance are complicit in the death of Charlie Kirk if Israel did it? Those of you that are thinking Israel did it. Now, I'm not saying that Israel, the state government, did it, but yeah, actually, if Israel did it, or if a pro-Israel faction did it, then would Trump and Vance be complicit? Sure. Or maybe not. I don't think they would have to be complicit. I don't think that they just wouldn't investigate. Again, we have Epstein Files, 9/11, JFK, USS Liberty, Harry Truman letter bombs that were sent to Harry Truman. I mean, the list goes on, and yet none of it's been investigated. No one's been implicated. Certainly no one said that this is an act of war. A U.S. president was killed. A lot of people point to Israel or there's other theories, but nonetheless, it hasn't been viewed as an actual act. Nothing's been done. A U.S. sitting president was killed and nothing's been done. So people are saying, well, this would be an act of war. This would be something that the administration would have to do something about. That's not true. There's plenty that they're not doing about when it comes to Israel. It's our obligation to investigate every single lead and to ensure that whatever story we are being told, it adds up. And the bottom line is that there's too many plot holes with this story. There's too many. What about the bullet that's been seen frame by frame flying at Charlie Kirk from the right? What about the exit wound? What about the fact we don't see Tyler ever with a weapon? What about the fact you haven't even said, Kash Patel, that his fingerprints or his DNA was found on the actual weapon itself? How about the fact you've never recovered the bullet to know for sure whether or not that weapon that you recovered is actually the weapon that killed Charlie Kirk? You don't even know that because you haven't been able to get the bullet, which is really odd that there would be no bullet or fragments of bullets. If it came from a 30-06, it would have gone right through him. And even if it didn't go right through him and it lodged in his spine, why wasn't that recovered during an autopsy? Instead, he was put into a casket within 2 days. Where's the autopsy report? Where's the entry wound? Where's the exit? There's all of these questions. We're not getting any answers. And instead, what we're being met with online by people who are typically skeptical about everything is they're saying, how dare you be skeptical of this? How dare you question the government when it comes to this? And it's just like the liberals that were totally and completely against Big Pharma for the longest time, only to suddenly during COVID tell us all that we just had to take the jab, in fact, 5, 10 times over. Just do what Big Pharma tells you because Big Pharma is now suddenly in your best interest. And that is what we're seeing from the right. These supposed libertarians who usually question the government, and now they're out there saying, how dare you, and shut your mouth. You're just a big conspiracy theorist. How dare you? Now, people say, well, what's the motivation? Why would the government then lie about Tyler? What would be their motivation? Well, why would the government lie about many perpetrators of crimes? We have, in the state of Illinois, for example, Northwestern University had an investigative unit that would look into all of the inmates on death row. And what they found was that half of all death row inmates were basically were innocent. When they actually looked at the cases, they found half of death row inmates were innocent. Now, these are not high profile cases. These are not people that you would know about or read about in the news, yet they were found guilty of crimes they did not do. Why is that? Because law enforcement needs to come up with perpetrators. They need to solve cases. They have a lot of pressure to solve cases. And if they'll do it in just random cases in a random state, they'll do it certainly for a high profile case, especially when they arrested two people wrongfully. They didn't want to get the third one wrong. That would make them look really inept. So just the motivation of the government to just go along with the story of it was Tyler, we're going to make everything fit. We're going to make all of the square pegs fit into a round hole no matter what. And anything that doesn't fit, we're just not going to answer the question. We're just going to evade. Their reasoning would be they need to look like they're not idiots. They need to solve crimes. And this crime in particular, they really need to solve. What would be Israel's motive, people say? Then why would Israel do it? Well, Israel itself as a state, I actually don't think Israel itself as a state did this. I don't think that there was I don't think there was a Mossad plot where they got together. I mean, it could be. And so I'm not willing to rule that out until we get more evidence. But it seems more likely that it would have been more of a fringe pro-Israel group or fringe pro-Israel agenda that really felt like he was being an enemy. He was starting to act like an enemy. He was afraid of them. And perhaps they're the ones who, I mean, look, if they can plant pagers and bombs in pagers over the course of a couple of years, there's a lot of things that they could do and be very sophisticated about and get away with really easily. It's a very, very sophisticated people, whether they be actually state sanctioned or just trained, highly trained, and having the same agenda as the state. What would be the reason? And why not Tucker Carlson? People say, why not Nick Fuentes? Why not all of these people that are more anti-Israel than Charlie Kirk? Charlie Kirk was a friend to Israel because Charlie Kirk was more dangerous. The friend to Israel who has all the Gen Zers, and he's been leading those Gen Z followers that he has towards Israel. And suddenly he started questioning things. Suddenly he started demanding the Epstein files. Suddenly he wanted to have debates about genocide and about ethnic cleansing. And that would have been very dangerous for what Israel is desperately trying to prevent, which is losing Gen Z. They already know they've pretty much lost Gen Z. Charlie Kirk was the last shining hope of not losing Gen Z, but they were starting in their minds, whether it was true or not, in their minds, there was clearly panic, believing that they were losing Charlie Kirk. So it'd be better to make him a martyr. It'd be better to say he was one of ours and he died before he could even turn or take one more step in the other direction. And that would be the motive. And if Charlie himself felt fear, and if Charlie himself felt intimidated, then it's worth looking into. I mean, it's a really simple, it's just like, yeah, there was an Institute of Virology that happens to play around with viruses in Wuhan. So maybe we should look at that. And people saying, how dare you? You're a conspiracy theorist. How dare you? Look, we're just saying we should maybe look into it because there's enough evidence that leads us in that direction. And the story you're trying to feed me doesn't exactly make sense. So, I think it's time to investigate absolutely everything. And that's where I feel about this particular story. I'm really disappointed in a lot of people who typically are the ones that question government narratives. And suddenly, when it comes to this, they're you believe the government or you are just one giant conspiracy theorist. Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iversen Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversenShow.com. It is free for you to watch. Again, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, KimIversenShow.com. See you there.